Hello and welcome to this video on transnational companies and government policy. So in this video we're going to look at transnational companies and FDI to start off with, government policy that can be used to attract FDI, measures to control transnational companies, and then some limits to these measures. So let's start off with a quick recap of what we mean by a transnational company. A transnational company is a business that operates substantial facilities, does business in more than one country, and does not consider any particular country its national home. Although its headquarters will normally be located in one country. So on the right hand side we have some examples of transnational companies. They have production facilities and they sell their products in more than one country. We've also previously looked at some of the advantages of being a transnational company and some of the disadvantages of being a transnational company. In this video we're really going to look more at foreign direct investment from the perspective of a government and an economy and what a government can do about it. So let's start off with our definition of foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, or sometimes known as FDI, is investment from one country into another, and that investment is normally done by a transnational company rather than a government. And this investment involves establishing operations, so building a factory for example, or acquiring assets, so buying a factory. This also includes buying shares or stakes in other businesses. So a couple of examples in the bottom left. An example of FDI into the UK was when a Chinese company bought the well-known breakfast cereal Weetabix. On the right hand side here is an example of FDI where the British company Jaguar Land Rover has built and constructed a factory in China, so that's establishing operations in another country. So both of those would be examples of FDI. Most FDI is horizontal, building production facilities in different countries but at the same stage of the production process. But we can also get some vertical FDI, which involves different stages of the production process. Now, due to lower transportation costs, changes in political outlook, improved in technology, we've seen quite a considerable growth in FDI over a kind of 40-50 year period. So this chart here shows us the flows of foreign direct investments in total between 1970 and 2015, and we can see the general upward trend. So when we talk about FDI, we normally talk about inward and outward. So inward is when an overseas business decides to invest in your particular country. So an overseas business decides to build a manufacturing factory in the UK, or a foreign retail firm invests to open new stores in the UK. This would be inward FDI into the UK. Outward FDI is the opposite. A UK business expands into an overseas market by opening a new production facility, or if a UK business was to take over, buy 51% or more of the shares of a business based in another country, that would be outward FDI. So some more examples. Here is an example of inward FDI. Siemens, a German wind turbine manufacturer, opening a factory here in Hull in the UK. And this would be another example, a Japanese company buying the computing company ARM Holdings in the UK. These are both the examples of inward FDI into the UK. Some examples of outward FDI: JCB opening a new factory in Brazil, or Vodafone buying a Spanish telecommunications company. So a quick summary, some FDI projects in the UK. So inward FDI, these are where the businesses come from that have invested in the UK, and we can see the number of jobs that each of those businesses from those countries have provided or created. So what are the benefits from an economic perspective, looking at the economy's point of view? What are the benefits of foreign direct investment? Well, the capital inflows, the increased investment, creates higher output and creates jobs. So this is quite significant, probably the main benefit really. It's certainly also an injection into the circular flow. Capital inflows can also help finance a current account deficit. If we're running a current account deficit but we are a net recipient of FDI, then this can balance out these flows on the balance of payments. Generally speaking, foreign direct investment is more long-term, building a factory or opening up new retail outlets. This is more sustainable than some short-term financial flows. So moving between currencies is more short-term, whereas FDI investing in factories is quite long-term and sustainable. The recipient country can benefit from the knowledge, expertise and technology that the foreign transnational company may be using in their country when they invest. An investment from abroad could lead to higher wages and improved working conditions, especially if the transnational company are conscious of their public image of working conditions in developing economies. So if we've said FDI is a good thing for all the previous reasons, how as a government might we attract foreign direct investment? Well, we might provide favourable regulations in terms of environmental standards or health and safety or working conditions. We might provide a low tax base. For example, Ireland's corporation tax rate of 12.5% has attracted a lot of investment. A lot of transnational companies have set up in Ireland. We need to make sure that we enforce intellectual property and contract law so that a transnational company can be confident that if they invest in our country, they're not going to lose their assets or be treated unfairly by domestic companies, or their intellectual property, their trademarks and ideas stolen. An effective labour market will attract foreign direct investment. So investing in education and training to provide a skilled workforce, trying to keep down wage costs so workers are affordable, and trying to make the labour market flexible so that transnational companies can easily hire and fire staff. The government can provide quality infrastructure through networks like ports, roads, broadband, etc. and key services. Also the size of the market. If we have a large potential customer base, for example in the EU or in the USA maybe, then this is likely to attract transnational companies for the potential revenues and profit they may gain. Also, governments may help try and provide external economies of scale by making their country a desirable location for support services or other businesses in that industry. So we've looked at some of the benefits of FDI. Let's talk also about the costs. So having transnationals operate in a country may give them quite a lot of control over key strategic resources like natural resources. Also, they may be able to influence the political environment and gain favourable laws and regulations which may be detrimental to workers in that country. Transnational companies may put pressure on governments to reduce environmental standards because they want a lower cost environment and with fewer regulations. There's also a question of how much do the societies benefit from the presence of transnational companies. If they're just operating there to exploit raw materials and a cheap workforce and the profits are being moved abroad, then is this going to benefit the society? This is particularly leveled, a criticism leveled at transnational companies in developing economies. They've also been criticised for poor working conditions in many countries. And lastly, they're sometimes guilty of what's known as transfer pricing. And that's where a large transnational company charges its different businesses in different countries costs to effectively move profit to a country where the tax rate is the lowest. So this lowers tax revenues in for the governments in those countries where the transnational company is operating. So if we've identified all these negatives about transnational companies and FDI, what can governments do to control this? Well, they can introduce local content requirements. They can pass regulations that a certain amount of output must be exported or that exports must balance with imports. They can require that a local partner is used in a joint venture so that they gain the technology. They can try and regulate the transfer pricing that allows transnational companies to move profit to jurisdictions with low tax rates. They can also monitor and enforce any environmental, health and safety working regulations that they've introduced. But what might be the limitations to government policy? Why might government policies actually not work very well? Well, transnational companies are notoriously footloose, and what we mean by that is they will move countries if the controls or the environment isn't in their favour. So the government will need to balance the pros and cons of the transnational company in question, and if they try and introduce policies to regulate the transnational company, they have to balance that against the risk that the transnational company will just say these regulations are too rigorous, I'm going to move to a different country where the environment suits me better. Some agreements governments have with other governments, so international agreements, under rules organised by the World Trade Organization, prevent certain protectionist measures like local content requirements and other protectionist measures like quotas and tariffs and so on. So it might actually be that governments find it difficult through their own agreements to introduce policies to limit the effects of TNCs and FDI. Also, transfer pricing, this idea that companies can move profits to low tax countries where their headquarters are, is sometimes difficult to prevent for countries that don't have much international influence. So in this video we've looked at TNCs and FDI, in particular what governments can do to attract FDI, how they can control transnational companies and some of the limits to these controls. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.